Hello, everyone. This week I read The Primal Hunter. I looked down at my notes. This is what do they say? A lit RPG. Now, I had been hearing all about these, obviously. I think I watched an old DG video on it. If you want to check that out, go ahead. Not sponsored. In any case, I wanted to check one out, so I grabbed this one. And I'm not going to judge the entire, let's say, genre over one book. This is just my first toe tap in the situation. Now, lit RPGs are, in case you don't watch the other video, they are like, what does it say? Isekai from Japan, from anime, where normie or such and such person gets transported to another world. And then, various things ensue. One of the big differences so far is isekai tend to have a bit of a harem angle to them, which this lit RPG didn't. I don't know if that's usual or unusual. I do know some of the isekai, a lot of them, end up harem-esque. It's its own thing. I'm not judging it. It's a thing that I realized. This one doesn't. So I'm wondering if that's a thing for lit RPGs. I'm not sure. As to what it is and how it goes, it's if you've ever played an RPG style game like a World of Warcraft or Morrowind, etc. Final Fantasy, probably a little bit like it too, etc. Any game where you get loot and you have stat upgrades. If you've ever played a game like that, this reads like those play. And not like I'm just sort of describing the play in a sense that I am. But the story elements make it feel like I'm playing the game. Or, if you watch certain streamers on Twitch or various other media play RPGs, it feels like watching them play. There's that enjoyment you get out of that. You're going to get out of this book, which is very odd. It's this middle lane between playing and watching. So if I'm playing the game myself, then, some of the boring elements I have to live through because I have to run my character from one place to the other. If you're watching, maybe they play in a manner that's not consistent. Sometimes they're varying the story and then sometimes they'll goof off, right? I can't control that. So on the one hand, I can control the story, but it can be irksome at times. And on the other hand, I can't control the story, but I don't have to do all the irksome stuff. This one controls the story for me, and I don't have to do the irksome stuff. You get what I'm saying? It's this kind of energy. We start the way these always have to start. Very boring office working environment. There's just a dude in a simple suit, if that. It's very bland. Nothing's happening. Just genericness all around. This is how they always want it to be. They're all adults. Some of them bring kids like 14 and 15. Some, various ages. These are all working class adults, but not like construction workers in an office. They get in an elevator ride and boom, the whole situation starts. I mean, we wait one chapter. We are not trying to play. Our first character is Jake, but the story, because we have a sort of a standard narration here. The story will move about to various people in an unobnoxious kind of a way. But Jake is our first character, so in our minds we think main character. He's your basic, I'm a loner, I'm not that cool, I'm just trying to get along, I'd like to hang out with more people, I have a bit of an office crush, but she doesn't know me. This kind of energy. Your standard, I'm an every guy energy. His sort of friend, his co-worker, is Jacob. Now, I didn't like that. One's Jake, one's Jacob. It's too many J's. It's too many J's. But, you know, you have to deal with these things. Friend is Jacob. Jacob's Mr. Cool, Mr. Former Athlete. Mr. Probably has his crap together, at least from Jake's point of view. And then we have Caroline. That's the office crush. That's the lady person. It doesn't describe like supermodel, but just an attractive lady in the office that Jake likes, but who probably wouldn't go for Jake. Who'd probably go for Jacob. This is the energy that we have. Once we get into the new world, the entire story just shifts. And there will be long moments of just stat reading. Stamina 10, willpower 5, luck 3, bonuses to agility, bonuses to strength, bonuses to axe wielding, etc., etc., etc. Right? I mean, it just like a game. Now, I was mentioning the games and such before because if you are a veteran of those games, it's not that you don't have to read it, but you've already read it a bunch of times, if you know what I mean. Right? I don't need to, even when I play a game like that, I don't look at specific stats almost anymore. I know upgrade and I just roll with it and nothing much changes about my play. So when they're reading through stats, a veteran type will probably skip this moment, right? And it won't hurt you one bit. You'll understand what happens. If you are someone who never has played those games, I think you might weirdly enjoy reading those stats. Because, again, that's an element to those games that even the drag of them sometimes, the boringness becomes part of the flavor of the game. And then in that sense, it's part of the enjoyment, if that makes any weird sense. But you will have sections fairly regularly of telling of everyone's upgrades. So know that going in. That's part of the RPG aspect of it. They are in sort of a video game, but it's real. That's the shtick, as they say. The outside elements of the game, right? The world buildy bit, I'm very interested in, oddly. The game, the overseer, the whatever voice tells them they're in a tutorial. And then it says humanity has come to a point, I guess technologically, I'm not sure, where they can be pulled into the multiverse. That's your backdrop. And like, we don't get a lot much after that. At least not in a dedicated spot. It drips that information throughout, and you're happy to have any bit of it you can. But weirdly, you're not hungry for it. Then it reads again, a lot like if you've played these games. We have, I think, 10 people in his group, and it says it's balanced because there's a right amount of range and tank characters. Tank being characters with heavy armor that can take damage. Range being mages and archers. and then they have one healer. And I'm like, this is another worldly power when you could have a balanced group. If you've ever played these games, the joke there being everyone wants to play DPS. Everyone just wants to shoot things. No one wants to tank and or heal and or sometimes both. Sometimes you have 56 people who want to DPS, do damage, and maybe one tank and one heal. Just for whatever reason, and it's been argued to the ends of the internet what it is you can do to make tanking more fun, and no one's come up with a good idea, a good reason yet. We then get into some of the, again, if you've ever tried to run a raid, there's a large boss that requires more than a standard group. Standard group usually being about 5. Right? So I need to get 2, 3, 5, 7 groups together. I remember back in the day, some of them were up to 40 people. And I have to somehow organize these people to kill that thing. That thing's going to do things to kill us. And what is the expression? It's like herding cats. You'll say basic things, they won't hear. There's wife aggro over there. I think my DPS may be drunk, but he's going to pull like crazy, so it's not a problem. All these elements come into play, and I'm just reading it and just laughing, remembering all these things. Because that's one thing, like a badger or something they're trying to kill. And they spend 15 or 20 minutes just hashing out how they want to deal with it. When it comes, I'll hit it with this, and y'all shoot it with that. It takes me like 15, 20 minutes just to kill a badger. And I was just kind of laughing the whole time. It's not long after the badger when Jake, our hunter, like with his abilities, because they all end up with abilities from their classes. And do they argue with it? Not particularly. He senses movement, and so he just shoots something in the bushes in the eye and kills it. Turns out it was a boar. I'm like, well, that's not a problem. The problem being, it aggroes, that is, in the games, you have a zone around you, right? And if you get too close to another enemy, it will then attack you. That's called aggro. You've aggravated it towards you, I guess, so to speak. He aggroed a huge boar that's like the size of a Volvo or some mess. Right? And it goes just ham through the group. And I'm just laughing again. Because this happens in those games all the time. There's always some DPS who pulls aggro. Meaning, you're supposed to wait for the tank to pull because these things hit really hard. But there's always some dumb hunter who can't control his pet, some rogue who thought he was sneaky, some goober mage doing something dumb that pulls aggro, and the entire team will die. And this is just, what is it? The game doesn't end. You're just very annoyed because you have to all run back to the dungeon, and you all have to repair your armor, and somebody wasted a potion, you know. And it's always some dumb DPS. So this is what happens in this. He aggroes this hunter. They all have to run up a tree. But some of them can't make it. They're all shooting it. But in the course, this truck-sized boar hits a lady and just like mangles her up. And I'm like, it went from fun to like, oh man, this is heavy, right? So they go down to her and they give her a health potion. Of course, it just starts to heal her. And it straightens the bones that are off. But the one leg got like severed. And it doesn't like doesn't reattach the leg. And I'm thinking like, Jesus. You got to let his leg knocked off. Right? And then they come to him and they're like, bro, why did you do that? And he's like, well, what's the problem? I saw something and I shot it. And then we go into sort of an inner monologue, which becomes like, what do they say? The Tao of DPS. It's their entire mental mantra, these idiots. Because he then spends, I guess, 2-3 paragraphs, justifying in his head why she was the idiot for not being able to dodge the truck-sized boar. That everyone else dodged, but she didn't. So it's probably her own dumb fault. He didn't do anything wrong when it was all 100% his fault. I'm like, yep, this is DPS. You'll wipe an entire raid, cost everyone time and gold, and then come up with some weird excuse in your mind as to why, well, if y'all didn't suck so much, y'all would have died. I was laughing. I really was laughing. And again, I'm wondering if some of it's this is a cheat because I've played those games. But I don't. There's no way you can miss the ridiculousness of that, even if you've never played those games. Very funny book, very fun. We then get to, we're trying to, I guess the tutorial is like 63 days or some mess like this, right? It comes into play once or twice, but it's not that big a deal. But they come to the first night and they need to set up a night watch. And they put Jake on it. And everyone else sort of goes to sleep. Later in the night, 3 people come out of the bushes. Not a boar this time, not a badger. 3 people, right? Now, it's him and his co-workers are people in this game. And so if you see other people, there's a quick assumption there that those are real people, even if they're wearing medieval style clothing now. That whatever this thing is that was able to control everyone may not have just sucked their elevator up, may have sucked their whole office. Could have got the whole world, for all they know. In any case, those are people. Jake looks at him. Gets some danger sense or something. But they then start to fight. And he kills 3 people. Boom, just like that. Then after the commotion, people run up and are like, what happened? And Jake's sitting there running through, checking his stats like, oh yeah, 3 people showed up, but I got them. Gave me good loot. I'm leveling up over here. And again, I'm like, oh my God, this kid's like a psychopath. Why are you just randomly killed 3 people and you're kind of smug about it. And his friends are looking at him like, I don't know if this is the person I knew from work. Because the person I knew from work wouldn't just randomly kill 3 people and be okay with it. And then he, again, like a DPS, instead of going like, oh man, maybe I got carried away. Maybe it's something about this zone that's making me hyper aggressive. He didn't ask any of these questions. He's just straight like, y'all need to get your effing crap together. You're going to die in this place. You don't wake up, Dan. He gets all serious. I'm like, I was dying. It's so silly. And this is something this book is managing to do. Your language isn't going to be, right, the highest end you can have. This isn't Dune with just scrumptious verbiage, right? But I don't think it could use that. It would be, overdressing a chicken, right? The language sort of comes low, and then my expectations are lowered a bit. Then he'll bring it up in spots in sort of the content, right? The emotions of these people, the seriousness of an accident. But then the reaction fits more towards the verbiage, his flippantness, right? His over the top, maybe being a psychopath. And so I'm bounced in this perfect zone where I'm very accepting of what's happening without disregarding elements, right? So when things start to conflict, when there starts to be inner conflict, like that doesn't make sense, you would do it this way. My brain starts to glaze over those because then it gets in its head, it's not that serious. And then when I get too unserious, a serious moment happens, right? So I'm caught in a perfect loop and it lets me accept everything I need to accept and discard things that I don't. So by the end, when you have big battles and things like this, I take them fairly seriously by the end, right? Because one, I like these characters. Everyone that gets mentioned, I start to end up liking. I think because of that language, because of the way he sets it up. Again, it's not overly done. It's very simple, but it's effective for its story. So I don't want him to die. But also, and more importantly, I guess, I don't know the rules here. It is sort of modeled after a video game, so I did meet Jake first, but that doesn't mean he has to live through the whole thing. You can die in a video game, and then, you get reborn. I don't know if this is an option in this book when these tests are happening or when a battle's happening, and it gets me a little bit on edge, right? So I take every of the serious moments fairly seriously, and the funny moments funny, but it's because some of the rules aren't established. And again, I don't know if my main character can die. Typically in books, you don't let them die, and it leaves you in a fairly interesting spot. Again, good, effective writing, not Shakespeare levels of language, if that's what you come for. But it is fun. You're not coming out of this with like glorious life lessons. But if there's anything, if there's ever been a popcorn book, right, this is it. You can just sit, read, munch on popcorn, and be very happy. I know what you're thinking. You can't eat popcorn and read a book. You'll get oil everywhere. But I'm like, bro, I have a Kindle and I can wipe that bad boy down. Up next comes Richard. Now, again, we knew there were other people. Richard ends up being one of those peoples. And he isn't satisfied with just sort of like, let's make it. He is proactive. He comes, and Jake doesn't like him. For actually no real reason. He comes and he wants to essentially assimilate their group. He has like 20-something people. He specifically wants Caroline because she's a healer, and there's not a lot of those. But he wants to assimilate the rest of the group into his group. And they seem sort of amicable to this idea, right? There's not a lot of resistance. Other than Jake, who's like Mr. Cool, he's like, look, I'm going to go off on my own. But if you do anything to my friends, I'll kill you. He has that energy, I swear. And he just rolls out, and Richard sends dudes to like track him down or kill him because he's like, that might be a problem. Jake kills those cats. I'm like, Jesus, Jake don't play. We then start to cut away from Jake to this Richard guy who ends up being, he was the head of like a security agency. And I'm like, well, that's just tailor-made for this mess. Command structure, athletic type of people, right? He's tailor-made for it. Again, this isn't a bad guy. He wants to win the tutorial, whatever that means. He clearly wants to survive this, whatever event is happening to them. Again, you see a lot of the raid dynamics. He, of course, as the story progresses, will make sure that him and his elite squad have the best gear. They're probably over-leveled because they get the best mobs to get to kill. The healer stays with him. He placates everyone else in various... I'm like, I'll give you just a bunch of material and you can just be a blacksmith. So that he can leave them there and not take them on the hunts to get more XP, experience, etc. So I'm like, all the raid dynamics just start to show themselves. Also... your what was it? Jacob ends up in a bit of a relationship with Caroline. And your Richard, the raid leader here, again, like most raid leaders, he's fine with it. He's actually happy that two people have found love in this weird zone of a world they find themselves in. Has no problem with it at all. But he does factor it in. again, like a raid leader. People in these games will end up in various relationships, and then it becomes complicated, right? So, if your best healer, starts dating a not so good DPS, she's gonna want him in the raid. But the raid's like, he's not really good at his job, and I don't want to carry him. But we can't lose the best healer we have. Right? And so you just sort of make an allowance for it. You're like, well, we'll bring him on the next raid. We'll raid with him for the alts. We'll gear him up some other way. I'm like, all of that energy starts to be in the focus here with this Richard cat. It's very, very funny. I was smiling through a lot of this book. I really honestly was. While they're doing that, Jake rolls up he finds a dungeon. And in this dungeon, he does a lot of alchemy. And again, we're walking through it. We're not, he did alchemy and we move on. We're walking through it. Alchemy being, you mix potions, you make, root of this and that mushroom, and you'll have this agility potion, etc. I mean, he spends a good chunk of time, maybe like a month or two in here. In the course of this, he's leveling. In the course of this, he ends up meeting the Viper God, some god in this game. And again, we get then more tidbits on the multiverse. There's just a god in his own zone. And he says it's been eons he's been sitting there. A little bit bored. Here comes Jake. And they end up in a bit of a friendship, his words. He's like, you know what? I don't think I found a follower. I think I found a friend. And it's just such odd energy for a god. At least for the first god you'll meet in this book. I'm assuming there are others. Again, nothing new here. This sort of irreverent god who curses and is kind of silly has been done before, but it doesn't mean I don't like it. Doesn't mean I'm not having fun with it. That's this Viper God. As our story's progressing, you're starting to like Jake more and more. He's getting, once you see his sort of inner thoughts, you go, okay, maybe he's not a psychopath. At least he's not trying to kill people every 5 seconds anymore. And again, you just accept this. Cut to William, who then takes up the mantle of psychopath, I guess. He is crazy. But he's like 14 or something. And again, this crap made me laugh too, because you'll play these games and you're sitting here trying your hardest. And then there's some kid and he is just like some kind of weird savant on this game. Whatever the game is, he's just like 50 times better than you. And you're like, well, okay then, I guess. And you always have that dynamic between sort of older people in some of these RPGs and kids. I know it sounds weird, but you end up playing like you're a tank and your DPS is 14 and he's super good at the game. But then you try and like talk to him and he's out of his mind because he's 14 and didn't know anything. You end up getting a lot of that dynamic in here where I'm like, on the one sense from the story, he's just killing people to level up because he doesn't care. Because he's god tier at this game. And they're taking it like, bro, you're just killing everyone starting wars and this is horrible. But I can see the dynamic there where it's like a visual representation of how these interactions happen in these games. It's very funny. He ends up wanting to like learn what emotions are. There's one part where I think like the blacksmith had his son die in his son-in-law and daughter die in one of these skirmishes. And he wants vengeance. And so he's gonna help Jake get this super armor. To get this super armor, the blacksmith like pours his life essence into it. And then he dies. And right, like I'm laughing. I'm like, because the William kid is taking it like hyper serious. And I'm just imagining in a video game where a kid's taking like World of Warcraft way too serious. And so there's an adult who's like, I'm tired of this weird, goofy drama. I'm just gonna live. I'm gonna leave and go fishing or something else. So I'm going to, give you all my good enchants. I'm gonna give you all my good gear. I'm gonna give you all my gold, and you just got to go make sure you get even with them. And then I'm gonna delete my character and quitting the game. Right? And you're just like, I'm out. Whatever. Hopefully that kid messes with that guy. But from the kid's perspective, you're like deleting your whole life, right? It's this kind of energy, and the kid takes it like that. It's so funny to me. He puts this right. He gets this armor, and then you get another tidbit into this multiverse, where it's some metal god who wants him as an acolyte, and apparently, the last one it happens to, and the one that really sticks the landing on it is Jacob. Jacob becomes, by the end, he's like a full-on paladin because all he wants is to do right. So it's just paladin energy all the way. Paladins being, like knights in shining armor that fight with holy light because they're so pure and good all the time. Anyway, Jacob ends up being a paladin. And in it, he meets like the goddess of light. But you'll see between all these gods that sort of the multiverse is maxed out, right? Meaning all levels are achieved that can be achieved. And everyone has their zones, fenced in, so to speak. But when you add a new race, when you've added now humanity, if you've added whatever other race, then it becomes a big grab bag real quick to get followers, acolytes, new upgrades, etc. This kind of thing. So it's part of the reason these other gods are dipping into this tutorial even. It's to, get as much power as they can from these new followers, from these new potential people that they can have. It's a very cool little idea. Again, it doesn't go into too much detail about it. I would have liked more, but again, I'm never going to be mad enough at this book to be angry with not getting more. You then get Jake returning because he wants to check on his friends to see if they're all right. But in the time he's been gone, there's been skirmishes started by the psychopath William. But the opposition side, run by Hayden, doesn't know that. And again, these skirmishes, I swear, there's one game called EVE Online. If you Google like legendary battles, this one has some legendary battles. This game is very difficult. They'll set up wars. Little skirmishes turn into full-blown money's lost wars. Very dramatical about it. It reminds me of that a lot. Where this infighting is just competition between two guilds for recruits and whatnot. It's very funny. In any case, Hayden's kid died. And again, I can see taking things personal. Like we're in a PvP zone, meaning players can kill other players. And you killed my boy, and he lost all his loot, so I'm going to, I need vengeance. His kid died, so he wants vengeance, and Richard makes everyone believe that it was Jake who was doing all this killing. So when Jake comes back, they trick him into coming to a spot, and in that spot, they ambush him, and he almost dies. He gets away, but Jacob is now mad at Caroline, like, I don't think it was Jake. He trusted me and you abused that trust and blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, there's a big schism there. So Jacob's not at the final battle. The big battle ends up being, because in the skirmish, Jake, who's overpowered now, killed Hayden, who was the strongest on the other side. So now Richard's going to lead an assault and finish him off once and for all. But, they had that contingency planned, and it turns into a big heavy fight. But he has a healer, Caroline. So now we're in the final fight. Again, all the battles are described very well, very imaginative, very action-packed. Fights are fun. The fights are as fun as I thought. The crafting was boring. We're in the final fight, and Richard has Caroline the heels, so he's going to win out. The other guys, there's no way in. But right at the moment of his victory, Caroline gets a spear right through the chest, like from behind. And I'm like, Jesus. She dead. Turns her into metal. I'm like, you thought for a second is she going to live? I'm like, nah. Straight up dead. And the kid, William, literally says, you always go for the healers first, which then made me bust out laughing again. Because this is always the mantra in these games. Is to try and kill the healer who's healing the ones you're trying to kill. Makes sense. But I just started laughing. He kills the healer first, and then basically the rest melee it out and kill each other. So that he's the only one left alive. He's got vengeance for his blacksmith friend, and he's tearing up inside. So he goes from I think he's a homicidal kid, just to he's just a messed up kid who needed, Ritalin, and he's learning about life in this game, right? So again, you go from he's a psycho villain to I kind of like the kid. It's very cool how this book does this. Jake then is grouping up with the rest of the people. He zones out, I think, out of the tutorial into the real world and just continues leveling. And then the book ends, essentially like that. So I don't like the end. Way too many questions unanswered. But then I also don't know if this is standard for lit RPGs. I don't know if they're meant to be episodic, right? I'm never really going to get the answer, or I got to know going in it's got to be 10 books deep. I don't know if this is a standard type ending, or do most of them self-contain more. I'm not sure. I do know that I didn't get enough answers on the multiverse and what's happening and who has this power and how can this be and is it even real, right? I didn't get any of these things answered. But again, this is a popcorn book. I'm not even that mad at it, even for the bad ending, right? It was a fun ride as I read it. I was smiling, right? I had fun reading this book. Will I read the next ones in the series? I'm not sure yet. I have a feeling that I will. I have a feeling I'm interested enough in the characters. So in that sense, I guess it's successful. Will I buy 15 of these? Probably not. But I'm interested right now. So I guess it's a thumbs up to lit RPGs. And now it's time for our ads. These are my books. None of them is a lit RPG. These are normal books. I got a book about, well, I'm not going to describe them every time. They're there if you want them. At the time of this recording, you can get Kindle Unlimited and read them and other books, get your value, or you can just straight buy them. Either way, I think helps the channel. You can also subscribe. I suppose that could be fun for you. Or you can just watch and enjoy, right? No commitment needed. Okay, people. I will talk to you all next week.